Hello, my name is Ivy Haxo. I am currently a senior marine bio major, and this is my project searching for the collector urchin distributions and habitat preference in Kaneohe Bay. So to start, who are collector urchins? First of all, they are a keystone species in coral reef ecosystems, meaning they're super important to the ecosystem, and they have been used as a biocontrol for invasive algae species within Kaneohe Bay. Another fun fact about them is that they love hats. They'll use their little tube feet to add algae, rocks, shells, or other things on top of them, like in the picture, to protect themselves. So my sampling sites. So I sampled all throughout Kaneohe Bay. I had 10 sample sites, and 5 I found urchins at, and 5 I did not. So my hypothesis is that collector urchin size will dictate their depth, distance between them and other collector urchins, and substrate preference. And I was looking at this on both a reef scale and an individual urchin scale. So my prediction is that both on a reef and individual urchin scale, smaller urchins will be shallower, closer together, and prefer rubble, which is broken up dead coral. And that larger urchins will be deeper, further apart, and prefer dead coral. So how did I collect my data? Well, I went out on the RV Kaholo, which is the HPU research vessel, went out about every week with my class, and I would go to all the reefs that I showed in the map above, and snorkel there. So once I got to a reef, I would start by searching for the urchins. And I would do this by swimming around until I saw an urchin. And once I did, I would measure its size, depth, substrate type, and the distance from that urchin to the next closest urchin. For all the urchins, I took photos so I could look back and evaluate their substrate and any hats or anything else that was going on with them. And I used time as a way to standardize my surveying methods. So in terms of data analysis, so I used all the data as I talked about from my field methods. And on top of that, I used data from my colleagues' capstone project. They did theirs on substrates, and they used CoralNet to analyze the substrate types. So I took that data from CoralNet along with my own data about the substrates that the urchins were using and did my own data analysis. So first of all, the results on the urchin scale. So I found 38 urchins in total. And here's the most significant result I found on urchin scale: urchin size and depth. They had the closest relationship, and I saw a statistically significant pattern here. So urchin size was a good dictator of depth. And on the reef scale, I surveyed 5 reefs with urchins, as I mentioned before. And so to do this test or this graph, I found the means of all the urchins at each reef, and they are shown here on this graph. Unfortunately, the results were not significant, but as with the other graph that I showed before, there is a pattern here. And on the substrate level, so here is a compilation of 5 different reefs, and here we're looking at substrate type and percent used. So in blue, we have the substrate available for the urchins at each reef, and as you can see, it varies from reef to reef. And then in green, we have the substrate used by the urchins. So another thing that I did was I separated the urchins into smaller and larger urchins, and I found that 50% of smaller urchins preferred rubble, while 55% of larger urchins preferred dead coral. So next I did something which is called an electivity index. It ranges from 1 to -1. 1 means that something really liked a particular substrate, 0 is neutral, and then -1 means they did not like it. So I did this test for all 5 reefs that I found urchins at. Here I'm just showing 1, but this shows the general trend of having live coral be a -1 and rubble being around a 1, and dead coral and algae varying. So conclusions from this data. So on an urchin scale, I found a really nice pattern between size and depth, and this is likely due to predation. Smaller urchins are under more predation pressure because in the ocean, it's all about size, because most things in the ocean will eat anything that they can get their mouth around. So if you're smaller, you're more at risk. And on the reef scale, I did not have significant data, so this is likely because there was not enough reefs sampled. So ideally, more reefs, and I would get maybe significant data or learn more from that. On a substrate level, the urchins really disliked live coral, as I mentioned before, instead preferring rubble or dead coral, depending on their size. And this makes sense because both rubble and dead coral are what algae will grow on, which is what they eat. Okay, so some implications from my study. First of all, that size and predation relationship was really strong. And again, this is larger urchins being deeper because they don't need to do this predator avoidance behavior, while smaller urchins are shallower or in crevices, as in this photo, to try and avoid predation. And so for substrate and reef restoration, collector urchins are super helpful in reef restoration and have been used in the past for outplanting. And now knowing this new data, that different sizes actually have different preferences in terms of substrates could be helpful in outplanting different sizes to different reefs depending on their preferences. And protection of a keystone species. So collector urchins are super important to the health of the overall coral reef ecosystem. And coral reef ecosystems are endangered from a lot of different things, including climate change and ocean acidification. So protecting and understanding collector urchins, which are an important part of this ecosystem, can better help us restore and preserve coral reef ecosystems for the future generations. So thank you so much. This is some photos of me and my colleagues collecting data, and here are my references. Thank you so much.